Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Apologies for those of you who may have lost the connection earlier. Tonight, we're joined by Matt Wright and Freddie Milne, who are going to talk about their experiences with FDM Group. My name is Lisa Jones. I'm one of the Career Consultancy Officers Association. I'm a former Army officer, and when I left the Army, I worked in financial services for 8 years before joining the OA. In tonight's webinar, the guys are going to talk about their transitional journey out of the military, some of the wins and the bear traps. They're going to talk through why military officers make such good project managers, and they're also going to talk through some top tips for best use of your funding during resettlement. Of course, they're going to talk about FDM, their experiences there, and life as they currently are on site as an IT consultant. They'll also perhaps talk a little bit about what the future holds. Without further ado, I'll pass you over to Matt for him to talk through his experiences. Thank you, Matt.
Hi, Lisa. I'll just give a very quick overview of my military career and transitional journey, just to give you an idea of where I come from, I guess. So I went through the sort of normal university and then I had a gap year before going to Sandhurst. My year at Sandhurst, I then joined the Royal Logistic Corps. During my time, I served in Germany, Worthy Down, the Falklands, and finally Cottesmore. During that time, I did the RLC contracts course, and subsequently, as a follow-up to that, my MBA, as it notes on my profile. In 2016, I decided that I wanted to move on. I was ready for a new challenge. I had a bit enough of the APC posting lottery, which I'm sure any fellow Army officers listening will understand. Initial thoughts, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest. I hadn't really thought much past joining the Army as a career choice, or when I'd been at school and university. So I didn't really have a kind of backup plan. So I lent pretty heavily on the Officers Association and their provision. So I took up the offer of a careers consultation, which is a very helpful steer in where to begin on the sort of transitional journey, alongside all the CTW and things like that. I went along to a couple of OA days, one focused on operations management and one on project management. At the project management day, there was an FDM rep who was there and talking about his own journey from the Royal Navy into FDM. I liked what he had to say, so I followed up on LinkedIn. Very shortly afterwards, an insight day followed, and so did my interview, which was in May. And then in July, I found myself in London doing the FDM Advanced course in project management. And immediately following that, I ended up placed with the Home Office. And I'm just about coming up to my year marker with the Home Office. I've been working as a project manager. I've already delivered a project as part of the transformation program, working with cloud technology in business intelligence. And I'm now looking at some quite exciting work in sort of artificial intelligence sphere with robotic process automation and chatbots, which is great, sort of cutting edge stuff. So that's my kind of quick overview of my journey from the military and transition into where I am now.
Hi everyone, I'm Freddie Milne. Like Matt, I'll give you a bit of a rundown about my background. I spent 8 years as an officer in the ETS, that's the Educational and Training Services, part of the Adjutant General's Corps. And it was really my last posting that set me on my path to where I am now. And I was posted to Northwood, to Joint Forces Command, in the people policy space, and I advised on the people impact on some what we call on the outside major transformational change programs. You'll know them as New Employment Model and Armed Forces People Program. So clearly some interesting challenges with regard to communications relating to those. But what that did give me was some fairly unique insight into organizational management at a very high level. And I had more direct involvement in projects within those programs as well. For example, a spouse employment support trial, which offered resettlement support to service spouses, basically. And that was a 2-year project where I got a little bit more hands-on with project management. So I've been plotting my exit throughout those that last posting of mine, And my initial thoughts there were that I wanted to go into management consulting, but like Matt, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I came across FDM's offer, and I thought that it gave me that commercial experience that I needed to bridge that gap into the commercial world, and also that hands-on project management experience. And since I did my training with FDM in January, I've been placed with BP since February. And what I'm doing at the moment is coordinating a training program to prepare the BP group for a new financial standard, all to do with bookkeeping around leases. Now, I know very little about accounting, but I think my time in the ETS actually gave me a good grounding and training. So that was a nice little segue into what I do now.
Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you guys out there to vote on a question that we're posing you. So which of the following do you feel is the most worthy investment of your resettlement time? 4 options there: improving your CV, improving interview technique, networking, or researching jobs. Okay, so the results there are that 20% felt improving CV and 80% felt networking. So guys, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's me going first on this one. I think I think it's one of those questions where I think you know, none of the aspects can be disregarded, but clearly there is a strong preference for networking there. My view to this was I needed clarity on where I felt I wanted to end up. So for me, the most important, if there is one, was D, the researching jobs, to be absolutely clear in my mind of what I needed to do in order to end up where I wanted to end up. So I knew I wanted to go into consulting. I knew I had a bit of a skills gap with regard to commercial experience. So it took me a while to figure out what part of management consulting I wanted to do. But what I did do once I finally sort of wheedled down into it was give me a bit more direction. And I started down by narrowing down what I didn't want to do, really. That helped me get that sense of direction. What I would say with regard to the strong preference for the networking option, I had this a lot during my resettlement period, where the message was network as much as possible, because clearly, you know, if you don't have those commercial links, it does help. But what I would say is, don't network for the sake of networking, network with a purpose. So during my time as a resettlement officer in the educational and training services, I saw a lot of people rather scattergun approach, attending job fairs left, right, and centre without really knowing necessarily always even who was going to be in attendance at those job fairs. I can only speak from my experience, but I personally found it a lot more helpful to target the companies that I knew I wanted to work for, and just jump straight in, get a point of contact who would forward me to another point of contact, and talk about that person, talk with that person about a more specific area that I wanted to get into. So I think from my side, just a word of caution around the networking for the sake of it.
Good stuff. Thanks, Freddie. Do you have anything to add there, Matt?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I agree with Freddie on not taking a scattergun approach to networking. I'd very much see it much as in project management, right at the start of a project. You know, timelines and things are not necessarily clear, but as you get closer to the end date, they start to get a lot more clear. It's kind of a funnel. You know, sure, start wide. If you're not sure about what sector or field you want to go into, maybe to speak to somebody who's got some experience in that area to understand, is this something I want to do? But do try and narrow it down. And once you've narrowed it down, you can then start to do a little bit more of in-depth networking across different companies, understand where the opportunities are, build some specific contacts, and do it with a little bit more of a scientific approach in that way. Yeah, I mean, the key point for me in resettlement is both the CV and the interview technique. I think much like writing reports, the quality is in the eye of the beholder. So what I mean by that is that much as with report writing, every commanding officer will have a preferred style. Every interviewer will have a preferred style of interview and a preferred way of writing a CV. You know, you can happily put your CV in front of 10 different people and get 10 different answers on how it should be. So you do have to use a little common sense. The key thing is to understand, again, the field and the sector that you're looking at, understands what's required from a CV for that industry. You know, if you go to your sort of CTW, you produce one CV and then you fire off that CV, it's essentially a waste of time, because you absolutely need to tailor your CV for the role, as you do the interview. You know, you are, I guess, selling your generic skills and abilities and your transferable skills from the military. But to go into interviews and to submit CVs for roles where you haven't made the effort to understand what that sector wants from you and what that particular employer wants from you, you know, what's their strategy, what's their style, what are they all about, and make sure that you specifically tailor it for that. So for interviews, for example, going to where I am, the Home Office, they've got a very strong lean towards competency-based interviews. So that's the sort of thing that's quite easy to find out. If it, you know, for example, with FDM, when we're going for the civil service, we understand that that's how they work. So you can prepare for competency-based interview. Similarly, if it's a behaviour or a skills-based interview, you need to understand that and do your preparation accordingly. So I think that's really important in that area.
Brilliant, guys. Thank you very much. I think all really good tips there. So moving on to another poll question now. What qualifications do you feel are useful for future project managers? 5 choices there. So I will launch this poll and you can all choose what you feel is most useful. So what we've got there is 50% with Prince, 25% each for APM and Lean Sigma. What are your thoughts about that, guys?
I think that there's a perception in industry from where I'm stood that agile is seen as the new fresh and exciting thing, and Prince 2 by comparison rather dated. But ultimately, as with a lot of qualifications, they're different tools for different jobs. So some projects call for more traditional waterfall methods like Prince 2. Others, for example, if your company is doing something with regard to software development, that calls for a more agile approach. And that's what my company is doing at the moment at BP. I would recommend, in terms of the qualifications to target, clearly target ones that are relevant to what you want to do, but also target qualifications that are versatile. So no one likes to do more effort and pay more money than they need to. And from my time as an education officer, I found some real gems out there. Specifically with regard to project management, if you want to get yourself a qualification for free, the Defence Academy, as far as I know, still offer a free APM qualification. And there are other real golden nuggets out there. For example, you can get 2/3 of the credits towards an MBA with Stratford Business School for about £1,500 and only 5 days work if you've done Captain's Warfare course, for example. So if anyone is listening that wants to chew the fat with me regarding qualifications, reach out to me after this. But the last thing I'd say, which is slightly contrary to where I'm stood as an education officer or former education officer, is that civilian employers tend to really emphasize the value of experience, even sometimes more so than qualifications. So just like a CV doesn't get you a job, it gets you an interview. A qualification tends to just open the door, and without experience, you might not stand up to the scrutiny of an interview. But at the same time, in the military, as officers, we'll have done many things that can equate to project management experience, and we might not realize it. So give it some good hard thought about what you can sell as actually qualifying you as a project manager. And you don't necessarily need to have rigidly applied any one of those frameworks or qualifications or methods to call yourself a project manager.
Brilliant, thanks, Freddie. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, no, I'd echo a lot of that. I'd probably come back to the point that I made about a scientific approach to refining what it is that you want to do. So I probably made a bit of a mistake here in that I didn't do it exactly like that. So I'd say don't do qualifications for the sake of it. Don't, especially if you haven't spent any ELCs, enhanced learning credits previously. Don't rush into booking things just because you think they're going to look good on a CV. Do that process of thinking about what it is that you want to do. Do that research on the sector and the fields, and on what qualifications are actually useful, and what are considered the standard qualifications in that area. Think about it. The ELCs, I won't quote from the book as to how long they're now valid for, because I think it's changed, but find out how long your ELCs are valid for once you leave the service. I know I was able to use them for at least a couple of years afterwards. So don't be in a rush to spend them just because you have resettlement time. There may be something that actually you get into a role and you think, well, it'd be really helpful to have a particular qualification now. And if you have an ELC left in the bank, then you can do that. And if you sort of use them on qualifications which have subsequently proved to not be relevant for the field you're working in, then that'd be a bit disappointing. So, for example, I did Lean Six Sigma course, which does have some relevance to project management, but actually is more focused on manufacturing, production, logistics, warehousing, and process improvement, which would have been great if I ended up going into that. But actually, almost as I was doing the course, I'd kind of made the decision that wasn't a route that I wanted to go down, and I wanted to look into project management. And I felt a little bit silly having spent an ELC on it, finishing the course and thinking, well, actually, maybe I should have saved it up for something else. So I probably would have had more value in doing something like management of risk, for example, instead of that Lean Six Sigma. But if I'd been looking into logistics management or operations management, then it would have been very valuable. So as Freddie kind of alluded to, understand the sector. If you're looking at software development, then Agile, again, it's very useful. For me, working in the public sector environment, Prince 2 is something which is still quite heavily utilised and is seen as a sort of a prerequisite for getting into a project management role quite often in the public sector. ITIL, I noticed nobody voted for that, but again, particularly in the public sector, if you want to work in IT service management, or if your project management area happens to overlap with service management, then ITIL comes in very handy. APM, yeah, if you can get that through the military before you leave for free, then fantastic. It's another very good handy qual. Just as it comes to qualifications, and harking back to what I said about CV, don't list every single military and civilian qualification on a CV as a sort of massive shopping list just because. Understand what they're looking for and target it specifically to that role and that job, because people will only look at the CVs for a very short amount of time, and if they're having to trawl through lots of qualifications which are irrelevant, they may miss the ones if it's a software development role, they may miss that agile qual that you've got, which makes you stand out. So be careful about what you put on each individual CV and tailor it. And as I said, just note the sort of filter qualifications, as I said, for the public sector. They often lean on Prince 2 because it's a public sector focused qualification.
Super, thanks very much, guys. I think really useful information on the different types of qualification there, as well as your own experience and tips. A third poll question we have for you then, we're keeping you busy this evening. Which of the following is most important to you when considering your next job? So would it be a job in your chosen industry, or is geography more important to you? Is salary important, or is job security more important? So we've got 60% feeling the industry is important, 40% feeling salary is important. What are your thoughts on those results then, guys?
Well, it's interesting that people seem to have an idea of what they want already. I wasn't entirely clear on what I wanted from each of those areas, but sitting down and really giving conscious thought to it, I was able to select what I would, if push came to shove, be willing to flex on and what I wouldn't be. And for me, being the little capitalist that I am, I went for C, a job that meets my salary expectations. So that being my priority, not minding travel and having a fair amount of flexibility with regard to the industry I wanted to work in, I wanted to be clear on what were my salary expectations. And it's a little bit of a taboo subject talking about money sometimes. So it doesn't detract from the fact that you need to know where to pitch yourself. And many in the military coming out to the outside don't necessarily have that frame of reference. So one thing by hook or by crook is to get comfortable with any employment grades that are used by employers in your chosen field and get comfortable with using those. And be prepared to discuss your aspirations in those terms as well. Where do you see yourself in 5-10 years time, being typical interview questions, and those grades clearly have a salary band attached to it as well. Questions are necessary to gain that understanding, but clearly be careful who you ask about salary, and be clear on what you are and are not willing to accept across all those different areas. And the last thing to emphasize really is to be reasonable, because you're unlikely to find an employer who offers the golden package with regard to all of those different aspects. And by the same token, don't be overly inflexible, but don't undersell yourself either. Just because you're keen to get a job, it can be actually quite tempting to take the first offer on the table, but it can actually lower your appeal if you fail to justify why in an interview you want to go for that band rather than the lower band. A strong justification can actually raise your stock rather than settling for less.
Very, very wise words there, Freddie. And I think particularly about where do you see yourself? I think a lot of people think that's just a kind of question that interviewers trot out, but actually it's a really important self-reflection point, and people need to think about where do they see themselves. It's not just something that interviewers ask as a test. It's something you do need to reflect on. So Matt, perhaps you could add your thoughts to that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, from my own personal journey, I knew that once I'd started to investigate it, I knew that I wanted to do project management, but I didn't have a preference for sector. FDM happened to be IT. I was slightly concerned initially about IT, as I thought it could be a little bit dry, but as it happens, it's absolutely fascinating. And you soon find out when you get into the IT project management that it permeates pretty much every aspect of a modern business, because everybody uses technology, and the more we go on, the more people use technology. So it's been really good. But I didn't have a particular preference for it, and I'm just lucky that I found something interesting. So I probably should have put more thought into that. I should have put more hard thought into the sector that I was going into and answering that question. I've been lucky in that sense, but I would recommend that people really think quite hard about that. I'd say around the kind of salary point, the key thing which I'd recommend people do is do a really thorough sort of financial estimate effectively. I put on there, what's your 2, 5 and 10 year plan? You don't necessarily have to have that massive salary first off. You might go into something where it's slightly lower to start with, but you've got that plan in place, so you can see the career progression and you know where you want to get to. But also, it's about understanding what your red lines are. And what I mean by that is, what's the minimum that you can survive on with your anticipated lifestyle? What's your best case? And that's understanding all of the things such as accommodation costs, commuting costs. Commuting to London, that can be absolutely massive. What sort of lifestyle are you hoping to live when you leave the services? I mean, one of the first things that regimental careers officer does in the army, if anybody comes in and says, oh, you know, I'm thinking about signing off, is they point to the big whiteboard in the corner of the room and say, look, these are all the costs that you're going to incur once you leave. Are you sure? You know, and that's fine, but you do need to do that, the grown-up version of that, which is, you know, have you got a pension? What's that going to mean? You know, what do you need ultimately to sustain yourself? And I had a pretty detailed set of figures for what I could sustain myself on in London and outside of London, and what would be a sort of what was that red line, and what's a comfortable goal. When you understand that, when you go into salary negotiations, you know, you've got a really good base, a solid base of understanding what you're working from and what you're working to. And ultimately, if somebody gives you an offer and it's below your red line, you know that you just can't accept it, and that you shouldn't sell yourself short there. And that's really important, because if you do squeeze yourself under that red line and it's not viable, you know, it's not going to work. So that's a really important thing to do. And I think probably perhaps a bit different for myself, as I was looking to buy a house and sort of move in with a partner. Therefore, it's a little bit more commitment. Obviously, if you're young and single, it's a little bit easier. If you've got a family, you know, you need to be much more robust with that estimate. But yeah, just understanding the career progression as well, and where that ties in with that sort of 2, 5, and 10-year goals. And that's my sort of key recommendations in that area, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. We're going to move on to a poll now, perhaps a bit more focused around FDM itself. And, you know, we're not sure how much you guys out there know about FDM, but perhaps you can answer the poll asking, what key benefits does FDM's Ex-Forces programme offer? And 4 options there. So, you know, professionally accredited training and qualifications, preparation, help with CV writing, that kind of thing, industry exposure, or perhaps ongoing consultant support. Results we've got there are 20% thinking it's the professionally accredited training, 40% industry exposure, and 40% ongoing support. What are your thoughts on those results, guys?
Yeah, very much in line, I suppose, with my thinking. If I rewind the clock about a year, for me, if push came to shove, which of those components of the FDM offer appealed to me most at the time, I would say C, opportunity for relevant industry exposure, because FDM have a fairly wide client base. Seeing as they've invested in you as part of their training program, it's within their interests to place you with a client that they feel is most suitable to you as well. And the aspect that actually I really underestimated, and I put this in my notes as well before the results of the poll came out, was B, because you do get a lot of CV writing support and interview preparation through the OA, through the Career Transition Partnership. But what I actually rated as part of going through the FDM training, more so actually than the professionally accredited qualifications, was that practice in selling myself to a potential client. In the first week, you focus very, very much on elevator pitches, and you get that really drilled into you to develop a real sort of cracking pitch at the beginning. And yeah, certainly something that I underestimated anyway. Moving slightly away from the question, a point that I wanted to mention with regard to, well, a wider point, was reach out to current employees. So if you're considering FDM, or if you're considering another employer, you know, if you've chatted to someone, if you've made a connection with someone, for example, with Matt or I in this forum, reach out to us, ask us what we think of the place. I was interested in another company aside from FDM during my resettlement. Reached out to someone through a friend of a friend, and I ended up getting notes for interview preparation and question sets and sample answers and all sorts, because he had a vested interest in actually getting me employed with his employer, so that he could benefit from a recommend the friend scheme. So you never know the perks that fall out of actually sort of making contact with someone and asking them some quite frank questions, because you can get some very frank answers as well that you don't always expect.
Brilliant, thanks, Freddie. And Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I particularly like the idea of it appealed to me, that is the sort of courses and the training provided, especially with the timing of the FDM Advanced course. I was able to do my 6-week course effectively as another resettlement block within my paid service. And I was getting my travel expenses, living expenses paid by FDM, so effectively free training, and I was getting to and from the FDM offices for free, which was great, and it just really worked for me. But in addition to the courses, I guess the stuff which happens in the margins of the FDM training, leaving the military can be a difficult process. You are kind of torn out of your close network of friends and colleagues. Even if you're into any sort of new role with the military, you very quickly make those sort of connections because of that military bond, I guess. And that's something that you get at FDM, because I was alongside on my course that ex-military group. There was 8 of us on the course, and it's effectively a ready-made professional and personal network of guys and girls that are going into the same industry as you. They're going through the same process of leaving the military, the same kind of worries and concerns, which actually, do you know what, the sort of Thursday night after work course beer talked out a lot of the concerns and worries, and there was just a ready-made support network, and it was great. And that's not something that I would have had if I'd just gone and joined a company out of the blue, sort of non-military related. And I think that's really helpful. And actually, going forward, that will be my professional and military network in the industry that I'm working in, and that's actually a really fantastic thing that FDM provide. Probably most important overall was C, which is effectively the client base which FDM has. You can approach a lot of these organisations independently, but you'd have to make it through lots and lots of CV sifts. If your CV goes to a company from FDM, it's because they are looking for an ex-forces person to fill a role. They're after that CV. It's not unsolicited. You're not in a cast of thousands going forward, hoping to get plucked forward for interview. They are looking for an ex-forces person with your sort of skill set to fill that role, and you're already down to sort of that handful of people. You're already through so many hurdles and filters, which FDM just opening the door to that opportunity. Not to say you can't do it on your own, but it's just a great way of opening those doors. And to a great client base. I'm working with the Home Office, and people from my course were, working with investment banks, communications technology companies, and all sorts of different things. And those for me were the key, the sort of network, and also the client base were the key bonuses for FDM particularly.
Brilliant. I think really, really good points there. And I think the kind of key point really was that FDM offers all of those things, which I think perhaps you didn't reinforce enough. It offers anyone who joins them all of those benefits, and throughout their tenure with FDM, ongoing support, which can often be invaluable for people. So, a summary of what's been learnt tonight. I think the guys have covered a lot of really good areas. Define and research your target job. Consider the wider aspects of employment offers. So, it's not just about one thing. It's sort of a whole package. Salary, location, flexible working, job security, etc. It all combines to be what the job is. And actively plan and prioritize your resettlement. I think that's something that I often say to people, prioritize your resettlement. No, never again are you going to get a whole year to really focus on looking at different industries, and really do spend that time. for me, the key things that I've heard the guys saying tonight, experience over qualifications. Often employers value experience over qualifications. Network with a purpose, do your research, and then the value of the military network. And obviously FDM has that, I think Matt called it a military bond, which, you know, I think can be really invaluable. So what we're going to have now is some time for questions. So we've had a couple of questions through already, which I'll perhaps start off with one. What choice did you guys have in where you were effectively posted with FDM? Is it possible to target specific organisations, or is that done for you?
I think there's a bit of pragmatism applied to it. The honest answer is what you do at the beginning, you set out your boundaries and you say what you would like in terms of a job, industry, geographic location and salary. And over the course of time, opportunities will come up, and they may tick all of those boxes, but they may not. And it's a conversation then as to whether that works for you. If you're going forward for 2 interviews, the client does get a first come, first serve. So you may have a preference for one and end up at the other, but not an option that where you end up stiffing yourself, because whatever you're put forward to will fall within your agreed boundaries at the beginning. So I had an option potentially to go overseas, as well as the BP opportunity. And regardless of where I had my preference between the two, I was happy with both, and that's what I set my stall out at the beginning. Had the overseas option been a bit more proactive in initiating the interview process, I might have ended up there. So I think that's the answer from my side.
Great. Did you have anything to add, Matt?
Yeah, you know, I just say, look, be realistic at the outset. If you happen to know that FDM has one specific client and that's the only person that you want to work for, you're not being realistic about the offer, because clearly different clients have different requirements for people as projects kick off and close at different times of year. So depending on when you go in will depend on the type of clients and the clients that are looking for people. And from that perspective, you know, from that element, you're just reliant on what's available at the time. So you need to be flexible. There will be lots of opportunity, but if you're very limited and very narrow in what you want when you go in, that's not realistic. You know, you need to understand that there's lots of different clients, and you need to be interested and willing within the bounds that you set out, a location, salary, etc. You need to be willing to be keen and go to these lots of different clients.
Can I just add something very, very quick there as well? Not many consulting firms out there, if you consider the Big Four, for example, especially as a new starter, more often than not, you don't get any choice with regard to the client where you get posted. And with FDM, I think the FDM's unique selling point in that respect is because you're tied down for 2 years. Flip side, you get job security for 2 years. That results in longer term engagements. So at least you know what you're doing for a longer period of time. That suited me quite well, because I was a little bit bored of the posting lottery and being moved on every 2 years, and at least I know where I am with FDM over the period that I'm with them.
Brilliant. We've had a few more questions. So the next one I'll cover is what, you know, which is actually something that you outlined in the beginning, where you talked about perhaps touching on future prospects. People are asking, so, you know, what might be an example career path, you know, what might happen, you know, perhaps even just for you guys to talk about your personal aspirations for the future with FDM.
Do you want to go first, Matt? mix it up a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the FDM offer itself, there is an opportunity beyond the 2 years, should you be in the right situation with the right client, to extend for a third and possibly even a fourth year. So you can continue to work with FDM. If you've been with a client for over a certain amount of time, there is also the option to actually transition to that client if the client wants to take you on as a permanent employee. Which is something that probably no other consultancy would offer, because normally you'd be barred from working for that person if you'd been there as a consultant. But actually, FDM do have a scheme by which you can, with mutual agreement, transfer as a permanent employee. Which is, if you happen to get somewhere and you love it and you end up being there for the whole 2 years and you want to become a permanent employee, then fantastic. Me personally, as yet, I don't know. I'll just see how I get on where I'm placed next year, and take it from there. It's all situation dependent.
Yeah, for me personally, I'm really enjoying my time at BP. Really good employer to work for as well. Very, very people oriented, and because it's a longer term engagement, I'm not just a flash in the pan for them either. So when I first arrived on the project, the program director sat me down and actually gave me a couple of days of his time teaching me the basics, class for dummies on accounting, which I knew nothing about. So I'm really looking to extend with my client for the whole 2 years, and by which time, hopefully, I'll have impressed sufficiently for them to offer me a permanent posting. And you've got to see it from the client's perspective as well. Someone who knows their organization, has 2 years of experience of working for them and has proven themselves as capable, is an employable asset to them, and far less risk than going out to a recruitment agency and recruiting from scratch. So it's certainly gives you the opportunity, whether you perform to their standards or not, or whether it works out from your side is another question. But yeah, the platform is given to you by FDM.
Great, thanks very much. You've mentioned, you, Freddie, mentioned an opportunity that you were offered to work overseas. So people have picked up on that and are asking if there's particular opportunities for people who can speak other languages. And indeed, if you are posted overseas, is that a package where your wife or family can accompany you, or what is the situation there?
So yeah, this was something I had a conversation with someone at FDM about. That appealed to me as well. I speak German. I grew up bilingual, went through the German schooling system, and the potential opportunity overseas was one in Zurich, actually, German-speaking country, and I have a bit of rusty French to my name as well. So it's all a plus. I think the best thing to do is to ask what the current situation is with someone in FDM's recruitment offices. Just simply asking them the question, what client opportunities do you have overseas at this moment in time? As regards support, again, I think it's a question for them mainly. In certain circumstances, you do get a different remuneration package than in the UK. In Zurich, there was talk of the cost of living being higher, and the salary perhaps being adapted in response to that. But the opportunity never got to that stage where I had those conversations in earnest. Yeah, not wanting to speak out of turn, I think that the opportunity is there, but reach into the FDM Ex-Forces recruitment team to really wheedle down into the detail of those questions, of the answers, I think.
Yes, and I think that obviously other questions we've had are questions surrounding your particular client base, what kind of companies do you work with, that kind of thing. And I think that obviously all of that information is shared brilliantly during the FDM Insight Days. There's actually been an FDM Insight Day today in London. There's one tomorrow in Leeds. The next one in London is on Tuesday, the 4th of September. And indeed, they are monthly. So do look on FDM's website for further information, but you'll also find the information on the Officers Association website as well, and you can sign up there. So I think there's been a huge amount of information, really useful information this evening. But if you want specific information about FDM and the programme, my best advice to you is to go along to one of the really excellent Insight Days run by Jim Goodwin and his team, both in London and in Leeds. And for anyone in Scotland, they have them there as well. The details are on the Officers Association Scotland website. So I think really what remains for me is to thank both Freddie and Matt very much for their time this evening. I think it's been really, really useful and really great to hear you guys having such a brilliant experience and both working in such fantastic organisations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome, and anyone who wants to reach out on LinkedIn, just please do ask me anything.
Yeah, similarly, I'm on the Officers Association contact list. If people are on that, I'm happy to speak to them.
Brilliant. We've had a quick comment from somebody saying thank you very much, very insightful. So I think that he speaks for us all. Thanks very much, everyone, and apologies for those of you who were bearing with me with the difficulties at the beginning. But this recording will also be available for you to catch up with online, and that will be shared over social media and on our website. Thanks very much, everyone, and good evening.